the biggest deception of a small business is that you don't have your owner's pay on your profit and loss, whereas a big business has all labor cost on their profit and loss. Your owner's pay early on when you start off is going to be a dividend payment to yourself almost. It's a draw. And so that's going to come out on the cash flow statement. On your profit and loss, it's going to look like you're making a lot more money than you actually are because your labor isn't accounted for on your P&L. You're kind of wearing 3 or 4 hats, right, when you start a business, and you want to account for all that on your P&L. Everything that's left over would be your profit. You can think of profit in terms of a return on what you own, and your salary is a return on work performed.
Do you know your numbers? If you are a lawn care business owner, it is so important to understand your numbers, make sure you are running a profitable business. Our special guest today, he is a bookkeeper and oversees over 50 different lawn care business owners' finances. Their company takes care of their books, and he has helped me, him and his wife have helped me so much understanding my numbers, helping me grow my profits, grow my investments, and increase my net worth, and most importantly, increase my peace of mind. So today's special guest has influenced my life very positively, and he's a friend of the show. Welcome back to the program, Mr. Joey Coberly.
What's going on, Paul? My now Florida resident friend.
Yes, sir. No state income taxes and hurricanes.
By the time, here from what I hear,
by the time this episode's out, that will be old news.
Yeah.
Because we batched record, but you do have a hurricane forecasted pretty close to where you guys are at, Pensacola, right?
Yeah. Supposedly it's supposed to be hitting Panama City, so we'll see. Hopefully not.
Yeah, I'll be praying the Lord will protect us and keep us safe in these crazy Florida weather, man. I've only been down here for a few months. This is my second hurricane.
Yeah, from what I heard, you got you picked the retirement village, so
yeah. That's a whole nother story. I'm single, guys. I'm making money. Life is good, and in the city I live in is a bunch of old women with walkers and carts and all that stuff.
Yeah. So before you move anywhere, I guess you better spend a week there, huh?
Yeah. So that's a whole nother story.
You could probably do a whole podcast on just ranting about that.
Yeah, the Cougars, they've been chasing me.
the big green industry influencer moves into town. They're all over them.
So the problem is I'm trying to find me a younger lady. But here's the deal, folks. We have limited time with Joey. I got a lot of questions I want to ask you about knowing your numbers, about the business side of finances. Before we dive into that, though, you recently launched the Joey Coberly Show. You're the next Joe Rogan here, podcast space. So tell us a little bit about the new endeavor, and then we're going to start crunching some numbers.
Yeah, so it's a show that's really aimed at people that are younger in business, and a lot of stuff that I wanted my lawn care guys to hear, the guys that I work with. It's a lot of business philosophy. And from my experience in working with the green industry, I really notice a lot of burnout. And I think that burnout is largely due to, guys not really having a reason why they're doing what they're doing, other than they're just, sick and tired of being sick and tired. And they're, just trying to make ends meet and be in survival mode. But I think the key to not burning out is to have a good philosophy of life. And so that's really what I'm aiming to bring to the green industry. And I'm also going to be throwing in regular green industry interviews that focus around philosophical, things rather than just like a how-to podcast, because I really want to know the reason behind why a lot of the big players in the industry do what they do. And so I'm really interested in picking their brains and seeing how they navigate certain situations and why that, how to think through situations rather than just giving us all a roadmap. Because at the end of the day, I'm a big believer in teaching people how to fish and not just giving them a fish. So I really want people to learn how to think through scenarios, because life's always going to throw you all sorts of different grenades, and you have to learn how to really navigate situations. And a lot of times there is no roadmap for the things that life throws at you. So just, trying to learn from the wisdom of others and have an overarching reason of why you're doing what you're doing. I think it's really important to nail down.
Tell us a little bit about the collaboration you had over the weekend.
Yeah, I had you've had him on your guest or your show before, but his name's Kevin Salters. He's from Root Development. He worked for a company, I think they did 6 or 7 million in revenue. He was the GM. He managed 90 guys, the team aspect. So he was a team leader. And then they ended up getting sold to Brightview, in which he managed for them for about a year or two. So I had him down. He's from Connecticut. He came to my studio. We did an in-person interview, which should be released here in the next week or so. And we went out to dinner downtown Pensacola, walked downtown with our families, and shot some content in my backyard where he kind of criticized my lawn, because my lawn doesn't look like a lot of you guys out there. I'm just a bookkeeper, so I don't know all the nitty gritty ins and outs of growing amazing lawns. So anyway, yeah, I had to listen to him, tear my lawn apart for about 30 minutes, but it was all in good fun.
Yeah, you have more weeds back there than grass. That's
yeah. Yeah. Well, I did a lot of land clearing back there in the last year, and so I just planted like a winter rye because we did it back in October, and so when summer came, the weeds just kind of overcame it, and all the winter rye the mixed winter, kind of died off, and then I never really replanted anything, and so here we are today. I'd like to eventually do kind of a, ask the audience what I should plant back there, and then do like a little blog or whatever on growing some grass back there. I'd probably like to do Bermuda back there because I play a lot of sports. So, some grass that can handle some high traffic, but that'll be a project later down the road.
Sounds good. Well, Joey, I wanted to ask you what the biggest financial mistakes that you see lawn care business owners make. For context, if you're listening to Joey Coberly, you're like, how does he know all these mistakes? He looks at over 50 different lawn care businesses books. And so I'm sure you pick up on trends, you pick up on mistakes that are being made financially by lawn care business owners. What are you noticing those mistakes are? And then what is your suggestion of how to avoid those common financial mistakes in the lawn care business industry?
Yeah, so I've worked not only with lawn care companies, but I've worked with a lot of service-based industries. And you do start to see trends. So before, I know a lot of people will probably see, the bookkeeping guest and turn it off. And it's like, what does that have to do with grass? But really all bookkeeping is looking at the past, so that we can learn from it. It's really just history. That's what reading financial statements is reading history. And so after you've been doing it a while, you start putting patterns together and noticing things that, guys are doing over and over again that don't work, and they keep doing the same thing, because they just don't know. And I've also, read statements in all different sorts of industries like corporations, because I do a lot of investing. So I've read lots of historical statements from other companies, and a lot of the stuff is all the same regardless of what industry you're in. But really, I think what I noticed the most is guys try to scale too fast and they say yes too often. So, but what I mean by scaling too fast is, growth takes a lot of cash. So anytime you're going to try and grow at a rapid rate, you're going to find yourself short of cash quite often if you didn't take a year to kind of save up some money and do what I call capitalizing your business. So a business that starts off with, let's say 50K, is going to be able to navigate storms much better than a business that had 5,000 in their pocket from the get-go and tried to scale with 5,000. And that's the companies that you typically see get in a lot of debt and have a lot of problems, because as you're growing your company, until you get to 7 figures or 1.5 million, a lot of times you're not going to have any extra cash. And so if you started off with 5,000 in the beginning, you're going to be trying to meet. I see guys scale through the middle ground, like we call it in the green industry. And a lot of times they have $5,000 in their pocket the whole time. And so they can't even keep up with payroll. They have to take out a line of credit. And so I think that it's good to just exercise some patience in the beginning and save up cash and hustle before you really start trying to make that push. I think that's super, super important. I don't think enough people do it. But every business needs to be capitalized properly. And a lawn care company is very deceptive in the fact that you think it just takes, like you had, Paul, with your Honda Accord and your push mower, you think that's all it takes to properly capitalize in the beginning. But before you know it, you need $50,000 worth of stuff or $75,000 worth of stuff just to get to the next phase. And where's that cash come from? A lot of times it comes from debt. A lot of guys take on debt and then they're stressed out and they don't make rational decisions. And then because you're not making rational decisions, you start repelling employees rather than having them come to you. And so if you're very rational and level-headed and you're not stressed out about making payroll, that's what attracts people, because you're very level-headed. But anybody that's in debt and running around like a chicken with their head cut off isn't going to make rational decisions, and they're going to repel people. And so I think it's all really interconnected. And a lot of it comes to building a solid financial foundation as early as possible. In the green industry, what's the best way to take care of grass? Typically it's to to make sure that your soil's good to start. If you start trying to build on bad soil, it's more work for you later on. So if you get your finances down to begin with, which takes some patience and some hustling and some grinding, a lot of that will carry over to seasons, over and over and over again. And so I think that, to me, is, if I was going to start a lawn care company, I would try to save as much money as possible, live on a budget, because your personal is really interconnected with your business early on. Really try and capitalize your business properly. And, there's a lot of people at the high level will talk about venture capitalists coming in and buying a lot of these lawn care companies. And really all that means is the lawn care companies need money. That's what those VCs are giving to them. And it's not that the business is bad. It's the fact that you just don't have any money. And so that's where cash flow problems come from. It's just initially not being patient, saving up money, and just, chilling for a year or two and not trying to grow all the time. Everybody's always talking about growth and growth and growth. Well, growth takes cash. So, I think that's the key. I don't think enough people do it, but that's just my 2 cents. And from looking at hundreds of businesses over the years, I think I don't think it's talked about very often. So I just threw it out there.
When it comes to financial metrics and looking at our numbers daily, weekly, monthly, what metrics, the most important ones, should a lawn care business owner be measuring and be looking at?
Yeah, so I usually look at things on a monthly. Monthly is probably the minimum that I typically look at as a bookkeeper. If you want to start doing daily stuff, I would highly recommend listening to Jonathan Potocnik. I know you did an interview with him and Naylor, really figuring out what your man hour is per job. That's a very, very helpful number. Labor is the primary cause for lawn care companies not being profitable. So really making sure that you've got your pricing correct early on per each job. I think that's super important. That's easy to have half of your client list unprofitable. So just taking a really close look at all that. On a monthly basis, usually I'm just trying to tie a bow on everything in terms of bookkeeping, making sure everything's good to go so that we can look at the quarter. I like to look at things on the quarter and the yearly a lot. The quarter, it's very important to follow your gross profit. So I know you've talked about COGS, which is cost of goods sold. Your gross profit is basically a measure of how well you're using your COGS. So you're going to track how efficient your labor is being used. If you're pricing correctly, how's your route density? Your COGS are all going to come into that, because let's say your route density is bad, it's going to show in your gross margin, because you're spending too much time in the truck, and that'll come out in your percentage, and you'll see that. And I'll try and nail down on that with clients typically whenever we're trying to figure out why is your gross profit so bad. And then on the yearly basis, I really look at trends year over year. I like to see if your gross margin's improving. I like to look at your profit margins, at the bottom of your P&L, just seeing if you're going up or going down. I like to take a look at expenses and knowing what the trends in expenses are. A lot of times, if your expenses are high, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It may just be you're front loading your expenses in order to scale to your next level. So just because your expenses are high doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just might mean that you're ready for the next tier of growth. So I mean, that's the big ones that I follow. And then cash on hand, I like to make sure that you're not falling too far behind in terms of like the industry standards on how much cash you should be having in hand, and tying in your cash with your growth rate, because if you don't have enough cash, you can't really meet your growth rate goals. And your cash is either going to come from initial funding, like we talked about, or it's going to come from profitability. The more profitable you are, you can typically grow faster. So, and a lot of your profit's going to be dependent upon how well you're utilizing your cost of goods. So all of it's really interconnected, and I'm really just looking for trends. And with trends in the past, I can forecast into the future. So yeah, I think that's probably my top 4, top 5 that I look at.
The biggest problem in the lawn care business is cash flow. And I'm curious, Joey, what is your advice and solution to navigating cash flow as a lawn care business owner, and specifically folks that are up north or in the Midwest where winter, there ain't no grass growing in the winter? How do you navigate those months where lawn mowing isn't even available?
Well, I think you definitely have to find some winter services to offer. You can't just do nothing for 6 months. So, Christmas lights are a good one. Snow removal, down in Florida, I don't really ever see that stuff, but we do have a lot of clients that do snow removal as well. Initial funding of your business with good cash is a really good solve for cash flow too. A lot of times, companies that are having cash flow issues are companies that never really had much money in the bank to begin with. Profitability is a good solve for bad cash flow. If you're operating at 5% profitability, it's really hard to maintain good cash flow. And then knowing your break even point during the winter. I do that with all my clients. In October, November, we sit down and we figure out what their break even is for the winter so that we can plan accordingly. So proper planning, it goes a long way. And then purchasing equipment at the right times. You don't want to be buying big equipment purchases and having big loan payments at the end of the year when your cash flow is low. So just being mindful of, when your cash flow is going to be high and when it's going to be low. And a lot of that's based on the trends that you've done in the past. So we'll look at the past to forecast the future. And so that's where having statements comes in handy, is being able to have multiple years where you can start seeing the trends and the ins and outs of the flow of your business, because you're right, it does depend on the state. So I'm going to give different advice for different states based on the different typical trends that I see in the cash flow in that demographic. So yeah, I would say the top two is, and also saying, if you're trying to grow too fast, that one can cause your cash flow to be bad. If you're growing way too fast, let's say you never really had the cash to grow and you've got really good marketing coming in and you've got really good fulfillment, you've got a good team, but you never really had the cash to fulfill all that. That's when you can get in some debt problems. So, it's all really, really, really interconnected, honestly.
Well, that's a great answer, Joey. Another issue that I find, and I've experienced this myself, I'm the poster child of undercharging back in the day. Eventually, I started raising my prices, but I feel like a lot of lawn care business owners don't know what to charge. And I would say the majority of lawn care businesses are undercharging, meaning the customer would be willing to pay them more. They just don't ask for more. And it's kind of this race to the bottom, because people are like, oh, well, Pookie's doing it for 40 bucks, so I'll do it for 35. And then, it's just this race to the bottom. How do you set prices so that they're profitable?
I really focus on what it costs to pay my team. I focus a lot on that because, everybody that's listening to your show is not the chuck in the truck usually. Most of the guys that are listening to you are value guys. So what gives value, if you were to think about it in terms of your company? It's your team. So what do you want to pay your team, and then basing your price off of what you want to pay your team. And then also COVID has thrown everybody's really trying to find themselves right now because nobody really knows what to price. Because 2015, you could be charging $12 an hour for some guy to come out and work with you. And now you got to pay him 20. I see a lot of $20 an hour, $21 an hour. I see that all the time. And 45 bucks an hour, which is what you could probably charge hourly if you were paying somebody 12, isn't going to work when you're paying somebody 20 or 21. It exponentially increases your man hour rate. So if you're looking at paying your team 20, a lot of times I see that upwards of 70 to 75 bucks an hour, and it can really exponentially increase especially if you're up in like the New England area, New Jersey, things like that, where you have to really pay guys a lot to keep them, 25 bucks an hour or whatever. And that your man hour rate then goes up in the 90s and maybe even 100. So a lot of times the biggest determinant factor of your man hour rate is going to be, what do you want to pay your team? Because you're a value-based company, not a pricing-based company. And that's really where a lot of the inflation is coming from, is in your cost of goods, like we talked about. So cost of goods is labor's the biggest part of cost of goods. You've also got material costs, and you've got fuel, which has gone up a little bit, but I think fuel 6 or 7 years ago was running like $2. When Trump was in office, maybe $2 per gallon. Now it's probably running about $3. And so, that's a much smaller percentage than you have to pay your guys. And so just really being mindful of what you want to pay your team, because that's ultimately what's going to drive your business to success, is the quality of people that you can bring on board. And if you can't afford to pay them, then you're not going to be able to have your business represent you and your values and what you want to bring in terms of customer service.
You mentioned the word success. What does a successful lawn care business look like Maybe somebody's just getting started and they want to set a 3 or 5 year goal. You see all these lawn businesses, Joey, over 50 of them. If you kind of graded one, like that's an F, that's a D, that's a C, that's a B, that's a B plus, that's an A minus. What does the A look like? What is the company that's stable, that's healthy financially, that looks well? What does that actually look like from a numbers perspective? A company that's winning. You don't have to give us like names of companies, but are any of your clients in that kind of to get a health score of an A financially in their business?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that liquidity. And so, what is liquidity? It's your ability to convert things into cash, or be able to make payments relatively quickly, that sort of thing. So, I would say, and Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank talks about this all the time, but having 2 to 3 months of operational expenses saved up, I hardly ever see it. It's rare. And it's one of the most crucial things to keep you from going into debt and to make bad decisions. And when you make bad decisions, you start repelling who you're trying to attract. So I think company culture is deeply related to how well your finances are, honestly. And so I would say having that OPEX. Another one is it's guys that realize what they want to offer to people and they don't waver from it. So this would be the guys that don't really believe that the grass is always greener on the other side. Like they're always chasing the highest profit margin, or they're chasing some other direction for their company, but they know who they serve, and it brings a lot of they bring a lot of pride in their work because they know who they serve and they serve them well. And so that converts into a simple business. And so a simple business has very few frictional costs. So I know some 7-figure businesses that have really low admin costs because their business is so simple. They don't need all that to even be managed on the back end, because it's just so simple that they choose to not even run anybody in the secretarial office or anything like that, which is crazy. But since the business is just so streamlined and the employees know what direction to go, they don't really have that many questions come up within the company because it's all the same thing over and over again. And I talk about this a lot, but Buffett says I know you talk about Warren Buffett quite a bit, but he invests in simple, predictable businesses. And so I think simplicity is a big driver of profitability. So the more complex and the more decisions that have to go into your business, the harder it is to be profitable. And that's going to depend based on your industry. Obviously, if you're doing hardscapes, it's a lot more complex than doing, lawn maintenance. But you can also have a simple hardscape business too, just by identifying who you serve. If you're serving different people and people that aren't necessarily all aligned with, kind of your vision, it's a lot of times that can create the complexity. So yeah, I would say a simple business that has good liquidity, so 2 to 3 months of OPEX, and yeah, that would be my 2 biggest ones. Honestly, I could go a little more nitty gritty if you want, but that's the 2 main ones.
I love it. Operational expenses. So basically, looking back at it costs X per month on average, and then multiplying that, for an overachiever by 3, and then having that saved. I listen to Dave Ramsey talk about retained earnings all the time and things of that nature, and that's kind of what you're talking about. But should that be like a separate savings account in our business, or like what? How do we have that liquidity and that, like, how do we set that up so that we can actually start contributing that and beef that up to actually have the 2 to 3 months of operational expenses set aside in the business?
Yeah, so you wouldn't want to invest that money in anything. You would want you would want that money to where you can have really fast access to it. So, Ally banks are really good when they give really high percentages. Granted, it will take you about 3 days to get your money, so just being mindful of that. But you don't want to be getting basically next to no money on it. So Ally typically, right now, they're paying about 4.5%, 4% or something like that, and that's all going to be dependent upon what the Fed interest rates are, because banks and what interest companies are willing to pay out is all going to be based on the Federal Reserve's rate. And so that's all subject to change. But yeah, I mean, just making sure that you have access to it when you need it, that would be more liquid. So yeah.
All righty. One of the biggest issues and concerns that my audience has, Joey, is profitability. How do I get more profitable? What mistakes are you seeing that are eating those profits, and what can be done to increase those profits? And can you give us some mathematical numbers? I know you mentioned 5% earlier. How do you get to measure that number? because I know some people calculate their owner's pay in that, some people don't. Can you just kind of clarify what the true bottom line is, and maybe like a grading scale, like 5% is average or below average, or like what's good, what's great, and what's the proper way to actually calculate that? Because I feel like sometimes, Joey, people are comparing apples to oranges, because the calculations are. I'll let you explain owner's pay and how that can mess with the numbers. But do you feel confident in my question about
Yeah.
profitability and kind of going from there?
Yeah. So Greg Crabtree talks about this a lot, and shout out to you and Jason's event, Lawn Care Life, coming up, because Greg Crabtree's understudy is going to be there teaching a lot of this stuff at the 2025 Lawn Care Life. But it's the biggest deception of a small business is that you don't have your owner's pay on your profit and loss, whereas a big business has all labor cost on their profit and loss. Your owner's pay early on when you start off is going to be basically a dividend payment to yourself almost. It's a draw. And so that's going to come out on the cash flow statement. So on your profit and loss, it's going to look like you're making a lot more money than you actually are, because your labor isn't accounted for on your P&L. And so making sure that you account for all of the work that you're actually doing, so what's a reasonable salary for the labor that you're doing? What's a reasonable salary for all the back office admin and everything that you're doing, all the estimating that you're doing? And so you're kind of wearing 3 or 4 hats, right, when you start a business, and you want to account for all that on your P&L. And then everything that's left over would be your profit. And so you can think of profit in terms of a return on what you own, and your salary is a return on work performed. So that's really important. In business, a business valuation is based on the profit or the earnings. All stocks move based on earnings. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if there's a recession or not. A company's going to move based on what it earns, what its profit is. And so that's where your company is going to derive its value from, is from the profit. And so if you're not accounting for a reasonable salary, you don't know your true profitability. And when you try and step out and have other people do the job, you're not going to have enough margin for it if you weren't accounting for it properly. So yeah, in closing, just remember that profit is a return on what you own. So think your client list, think your truck, think your trailer, think your lawnmowers, all those things that that you own in terms of assets. That is what's giving your company the value, assuming that it's turning a profit. Now, different industries have different levels of profit to shoot for. So in lawn maintenance, I like to shoot for 15%. I think that's pretty good. Landscaping, you're probably going to want to shoot a little higher because it's more of a skilled position. So, 20 to 25 is good. And those are really lofty goals. So if you're hitting those, really well done. But the thing is, usually the higher profit margin businesses are harder to scale because there's more complexity to them. And it's harder to build a team that can carry out your creativeness as the main guy doing all the work. So in lawn maintenance, it's really easy to it's a scalable, repeatable process. It's pretty easy. There's a lot of money to be made in lawn maintenance. Don't let anybody tell you that there's not. And you can scale it much faster because of the amount of complexity is much lower. So you might have lower profit margins, but you can scale it faster. So it's kind of inversely related to landscaping or hardscaping or something like that with more complexity. But generally speaking, depending on how skilled the job is, your profit margins are generally going to be higher. And for a lower skilled type of things, the profit margins are going to be lower, but they're easier to scale. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yeah, definitely. Now, when you mentioned the 15% would be a very good accomplishment for a lawn care business, and I know you probably already answered this, but my brain kind of got confused. The owner's pay, is that calculated in that 15% on, like, it's a line item on that profit and loss statement, or it's not when you get to that 15% profit in a lawn business?
Well, let's say that theoretically you've got a little $100,000 business, just to keep things easy, 100,000 revenue per year. And let's say that you don't have any labor on the books. And so your bottom line, you don't really have any expenses hardly. You're not really set up to scale. You don't have rent cost. Maybe you don't even have a CRM yet. You don't have a bookkeeper. You don't have any payroll. All you've got is gas and materials, and then, a few other little things here and there. But for the most part, it's going to look like, on $100,000 business, you might've made 70 grand. And so it's like, man, I've got 70% profit margins. Whereas I would say that's not even the case. For example, you haven't put any money in like early on when you're doing everything, you should be shooting for paying yourself 40 to 50% of that. Not that you necessarily have to pay yourself, just account for it on the P&L. And so if you put 50% and plop it on that P&L, then all of a sudden you're down to 20% profit margins. And then, let's say that you want to make some margin for marketing. Maybe you haven't done any marketing. So that's another 5% that you'd like to account for. So you're also trying to account for percentages of things that you will probably need in the foreseeable future too. If marketing might just take up 5%, so now you're down to 15% already, going from that $100,000 mark. So it's not that you have to pay yourself that much money. You just need to know how much work you're putting into the business, because that's all going to come down to how much you actually get to keep, assuming that your business was on autopilot. That's a good way to think about it. Like if you stepped away and your business was on autopilot, how much money would be left over for you as somebody that's not even working in the business? And that would be your profit.
Thanks for clarifying.
Sure.
When it comes to organizing the finances in our business, in our personal life, as you're a bookkeeper and you have these organizational, everything sorted out and arranged a certain way, what is the right way to do it so that we have a cleanliness, we have an organization about us, things are fixed up nicely from a financial perspective? How do we organize our business? And I know you've been influenced by Mike Michalowicz and kind of having multiple accounts, but go ahead and share with us from your experiences and from your customers, what's a good way that we have kind of a structure to our finances, both personally and the business? How should we properly set everything up and manage the business financial structure?
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people realize how intricately related their personal and their business is early on. I get asked all the time, well, how am I doing? How am I doing in business? And a lot of times on the personal side, they're having to draw more than they normally would, because they're deeply in debt on the personal side. And so it makes their draws pull a lot of the equity out of their business. And so they don't have any fuel for their business because they're so far in debt on the personal side. So I would say getting your personal side in order is going to affect your business very, very closely. And so kind of like you're talking about doing the Dave Ramsey thing, get out of debt, whatever. It's however you want to structure your personal life to where you can retain a lot of the money in the business, and that they're acting as two separate structures. Because if your personal is intertwined with your business, for example, drawing a lot of money out wouldn't necessarily mean that you're intertwining with your personal, but it's still affecting your ability to keep a lot of money inside the business. And I think keeping money inside the business early on is very important if you can. And so, just making sure that there's peace in your home so you can have peace in your business, and that so you can be rational and be thinking through things, but making sure that you keep track of, all of your receipts and everything. If you don't have a bookkeeper, keeping track of all of your asset purchase document and everything like that. Just making sure you have kind of a trail of things for all the decisions that you've made in your business. I think it's pretty important, assuming that you're still small and you haven't really hired a team to help you out with it.
Now, I want you to critique how I have mine set up. And I started working with your company in 2020. And it's been a game changer, Joey. And you can attest to this, and your wife, Megan, who's been seeing my books since then. 2021 got better than 2020, revenue and profit. And then 2022 got better. 2023 got better. Now 2024, we're kicking butt and taking name. I mean, it's every year my revenue's grown and my profit's grown, but it's because you guys have really helped me kind of gamify. Let's get let's try to keep the expenses under this number, and then let's try to go out and make as much revenue as we can. But anyway, my question for you is, as you look at my setup, I have QuickBooks Online, I have Jobber, and those were, before I started working with your company, I've had QuickBooks, I think, since 2011, and I got Jobber in 2019. But the way I have mine set up is I have a state bank, national bank, regional bank, whatever, and my income goes in there, Joey, in my income account that I learned from Mike Michalowicz. Then I transfer some of that immediately into a different bank for the tax account, a percentage that you and Megan and Sheila suggest, so that I have taxes, quarterly taxes. Then I transfer another amount into the operational expense account that I do all my operating expenses out of. How is that system with QuickBooks, with the CRM Jobber, with multiple bank accounts? Is there anything I could be doing better with technology and all this software and AI and everything that's out there? Am I fine the way I am, or is there some way that I could be improved? Should I have more accounts? What do you think? Just a honest feedback to me.
Profit first is kind of just a budget is basically all it is. And yeah, it's a little complicated moving everything around, but once you're going to have to learn some routine in your business. Like for example, in Mike McAllowitz, he wants you to transfer all these different accounts on the 10th and the 25th. That's like the kind of the flow of the thing. So just getting in the habit of being in sort of a routine with a lot of your finances, you're going to have to throw it into your business one way or another. I think you do a great job, Paul. I think that through our partnership, it's largely, we keep each other accountable, and I think that's a big portion of business is making sure that you have other people around you to keep you accountable. If you were going to try and stop, I don't know, let's say you're an alcoholic or something, trying to stop drinking, you would want somebody that's an accountability partner with you, somebody you call if you're about to have a moment of weakness or something like that. And so having a good team around you is super, super important. I'm lucky to have a really good team around me. Megan's a good accountability partner. We have other people in our business, that are good at other certain things. And it's really nice to, I'll have, for example, I'll have really good ideas and I'll have some terrible ideas. And I love having a team around me to say, hey, that's a terrible idea. And then we can kind of capitalize on all the good ideas. And so there's so many stupid ideas that I have that would never work. And I'm lucky to have a team that's my accountability to say, hey, don't do that, and I think everybody needs that. And it's really easy to not have that when you're first starting out. Entrepreneurship's really lonely for a long time until you get some other players that are moving towards the same goal with you. And that's where you can kind of get collaboration and, where I talk about this a lot, but 1 + 1 = 3. It's the only time 1 + 1 = 3 is through collaboration with others. You can drive yourself to a higher level of achievement with just one extra person that you couldn't have got to individually. But yeah, Paul, as long as if you do profit first, it will work. It's a system. It's proven to work. I've done it since day one for, 7 years we're going on now. And just being methodical about it, being in consistency is key. Making sure you're doing it on the 10th and the 25th is very important. If you start letting something go by the wayside, that's when your budget gets all out of whack. So.
Nice. Well, I hope that you and, I guess Megan will have the baby, but I hope you can come to the Lawn Care Life Conference in February.
I'm planning on it.
People can meet you and everything like that. They sponsored Jason's event when his prices were pretty cheap back in 2019 or 2020. You guys got the Jason Creel special and set up your little booth. And because you were there, because you drove all the way up to Birmingham, Alabama, I met you and Megan, and we kind of went back in this wedding chambers and did a podcast in the back of the building there. And shortly after that, I hired you guys. I was kind of embarrassed because I got this big podcast and all this stuff, and the fact of the matter was my business wasn't organized to the extent that it should have been. There's a lot of mistakes that were being made, but working with you guys over the last several years, I can't thank you, Joey. I just feel so much peace financially and the traction that I'm making and the my net worth when we started to what my net worth is now. And it's not where I want it to be by any stretch of the imagination, but it's improving. And you guys have really, really helped me. So if somebody's interested in maybe working with you the way I do, are you even taking on any new clients? Or is that something maybe in 2025, or what's your availability and what does it look like to work with the landscaping bookkeeper?
Yeah, I'll answer that in a second. First, I want to give a shout out to everybody at Lawn Care Life. I met you there in 2020 and Jason. You guys are really awesome. You truly care about everybody. I really respect that. And then going back in 2024, I got to meet Naylor and John Pajak and Jonas Olson and the Almonds and Jeremiah, and all these people just truly care about everybody. I think that's the key to building a community is like everybody really does care. Nobody's just out to make money. And so I want to give everybody there a shout out. If you're on the fence about coming, definitely come out there, because it's not like a giant upsell or anything like that. It's just people trying to get together and work together towards a common goal. So I think that's really awesome. I'm really trying to make LCR Summit if I can. I'm going to Kansas from the 3rd through the 9th, and so if I do try and make it to LCR just as a guest, I would have to basically catch an immediate plane back up there. So we'll see. I'm talking to Megan about it, but and we have the baby almost here too, so it complicates things. But
it's your only chance of the year to meet Jonathan Potoshnik.
Yeah,
you guys would have a great conversation.
I listened to that podcast with you, Naylor, and Jonathan at his house in Texas, and that's kind of what sold me. I was really like, man, I really got to make this work. So hopefully I can haul butt back up there to Kentucky. It'll be a lot of traveling for me, and then unfortunately Megan wouldn't be able to come because she's 8 months pregnant. But I'm going to see if I can make it happen. Hopefully I can do it. But I'm not much for traveling too, so we'll see how it goes. Anyway, I totally forgot your last question.
How can people connect with the Landscaping Bookkeeper?
Okay, yeah. So you can go on our website, thelandscapingbookkeeper.com, and schedule a 15-minute phone call. We're also on Instagram and Facebook, and I have my podcast as well, the Joey Coberly Show. But as of now, that's the ways right there. We're on Google Business, obviously, but plan on getting on Twitter eventually and everything else, and YouTube. But for now, that's the 3 main ones.
Okay, we have about 9. Let me see, probably about 10 minutes left until I gotta transition over to another call with one of my other coaches. What's your best advice? Maybe top 2 or 3 pieces of advice to somebody who wants to get their lawn care business finances better organized and more profitable. What's your advice, Joey?
I'm going to say the same thing everybody else at 9 or 10 figures says, and that is saving up that first 100 grand is the hardest part. If you can get past that part, that is the key. Like, so I can tie it into back what I was just talking about. If you can capitalize your business as early as possible, you're set up for a very long time. You're not going to have the typical cash flow problems that a lot of these big businesses have, because they probably didn't save up that initial funding of their business to begin with. But get your hands on $100,000, save that up. And so how do you do that? You get that from hustling. Hormozy talks about that all the time. Alex Hormozy, he wants to make it's standard for guys 16 to 28 to be working 60, 80 hours a week. And a lot of that should coincide with staying on a budget, so you're working your butt off, you're staying on a budget, and you're saving a lot of money, and you're gaining a lot of experience from it. And so when you have experience combined with, $100,000, whenever you're really young in business, that is the key right there. And it's especially tough because I work with, single guys in business, and I work with a lot of married guys. The married ones have the hardest time doing it, because you have kids, you have a lot more extra responsibilities. You're not as risk averse, and so, but if you can get your whole family on board and collectively work towards a unified goal, and so you're almost intertwining, the Dave Ramsey things that you're really talking about, of just living on a budget and hustling at the same time. And then if you can coincide that with entrepreneurship, and so you're funding your business with a large chunk of change early on, you're not going to have a lot of these problems that everybody talks about. You're not going to be one of those businesses that goes bankrupt or whatever. I think they say like 95% of businesses fail in the first 5 years. That's not going to be you, because you're being wise, and you're gaining experience, and you're saving up money. So I think that's the key. You'll hear it from all these big dogs at 9, 10 figures, and that's essentially what they're saying, is just hustle in the beginning, and you can kind of coast a little bit later. But saving up $100,000 is much harder than getting to 7 figures. Like, it really is.
That's very, very well said. If you guys are listening in real time, you only have a few days to get your ticket to the LCR Summit, if they're even available. They might be sold out by the time. Say we record this episode, and then I send it to Mr. Producer, and then he puts it in queue. And so it's going to come out pretty close to the Equip Expo LCR Summit week. And the Equip Expo won't sell out because it's a gigantic expo hall. And even though they have over 30,000 registered and whatnot, they can bring another 1,000 in, no problem. But the LCR Summit, Naylor's event, he rented out at the hotel, the Galt House, he rented out like one of those conference room type things. and there's just limited space. But if you can get in that room, Joey, if you get the pregnant wife, obviously that's a tough.
Yeah, she's not coming, but I'll try and.
No, but I mean, if you can get the pregnant wife to let you leave, that
Yeah.
go, that would be awesome. But my point in saying that is my ultimate business mentor, and I know you mentioned Alex Mosey, he's sharp. Jonathan Potoshnik, he's built 3 different businesses past 10 million a year in revenue. Started with a cleaning business, like they would clean not hotels, movie theaters and stuff like that. And then he got out of that business, and simultaneously he built 2 businesses at the same time. I know people are like, you need to focus on one thing at a time. Jonathan ran 2 businesses at the same time. He said he had his offices like on the same street, so he could just walk from City Turf, his lawn business, over to Service Autopilot, and then back and forth. They were different buildings, but he could just walk across or whatever. But Service Autopilot is a CRM that he built up, and nobody knows how much he sold it for. But there's rumors, and there's, you can go on Reddit. I mean, there's all kind of stuff out there on the internet. But a lot of money, okay, a ton of money that he sold that software company for. And then his business now, his lawn business, effortlessly makes 15 million a year revenue. And anyway, he's going to hang out with us at the LCR Summit. He's the speaker on Tuesday, October 15th. That would be the date. And he's going to be hanging around on Monday and Tuesday at LCR Summit, just hanging out with us. And so it's an opportunity of a lifetime. I still can't believe I got to go to his beautiful home and hang out with him in Texas and have him on the podcast. But my encouragement to you, Joey, and anyone listening, if you can get your butt to Equip Expo a couple of days early for the LCR Summit, and shake Jonathan's hand and ask him these questions, it will change your business when you get a hold of these principles and be around these successful people who understand business. I mean, to Jonathan, it's a piece of cake to take a business from scratch and to get it past 10 million in annual revenue, and then the multiples of that, selling it for hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, it's just, to him, it's like a game, and it's so easy, and it's just,
he's figured it out. Yeah, he's the OG of lawn care as far as I'm concerned. I really want to go up there and meet him. If I could meet anybody in the green industry, I've met a lot of people within it, but if there's the one person I'd really like to meet would be Potoshnik. He seems, and you've got your stamp of approval on it, but he seems from the outside looking like a very humble guy, which I really respect that. So,
and when I say stamp of approval, his humility, I mean, he is very, very, very rich. I mean, he is so rich, it's ridiculous. And he's him and his wife are very intentional not to flaunt. You're never going to see him show off his Ferraris and his mansions, and you ain't going to see none of that. He's just very, very, very discreet about how wealthy he is. But what he is out there with is helping, helping, and specifically younger entrepreneurs. He has a passion to help younger entrepreneurs, and that's why he hung out with Naylor and I. And we were smart. Like, we picked up the tab when, Naylor paid for lunch the one night, I paid for dinner. And we're like, dude, we're grateful for your time here. But he was honored to kind of teach us a little bit. But anyway, I just say all of that, guys. Jonathan Potoshnik is going to be hanging out with us for the only time all year at the LCR Summit on Monday, October 14th, Tuesday, October 15th. You can meet him yourself. You can learn from him yourself. We try our best on the Joey Coberly show and on the Green Industry podcast and things of that nature. But we're learning, we're growing. And Jonathan has done it not once, not twice, but 3 times. And his net worth is just, I don't know what it is. It's got to be north of $100 million.
One thing that really sets him apart is he really speaks, he speaks complex issues very simply. So he breaks things down in very simple layman's terms, which is, if you've ever heard this quote by Da Vinci, it's simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And so I really am impressed with his ability to break down complex issues and make them very simple for the layperson. I know when you and Naylor asked him a question about pricing, he was like, look, just focus on your man-hour rate, and a lot of the stuff will kind of fit in, and it's so true. And he's done it 3 times to 8 figures. And so I think he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. Totally.
It's so easy to get caught up in all the noise of do this and do that and do this and do that. But I mean, really, you listen to Jonathan, you're gonna get some he's going to set you in the right direction. You don't really need all that noise. You know what I'm saying?
Yep. Well, I'm a student. I've been taking notes of Joey Coberly here. I got pages and pages of notes. My handwriting's kind of like chicken scratch because I write so fast and I drank too much coffee today. But I'm learning from you, Joey, and I'm definitely humbling myself. And I'll be at LCR Summit, probably front row, taking notes, maybe second row. I don't know, but I'll try to get as close to JP as I can and just continue to learn. And I'm giving you guys an invitation to join us. LCR Summit, October 14th and 15th, Louisville, Kentucky. Right after that, same city, Equip Expo. That's October 15, 16, 17, 18. I'll be podcasting Joey in the John Deere booth the whole show. Mr. Producer Night. It's going to be a blast in the John Deere booth at Expo. That's going to be fun. And then in 2025, I think the dates are February 21 through 22. That's Jason Creel's event, the Lawn Care Life Conference. And as Joey mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, Brandon Gray, who works on the team with Greg Crabtree, he's coming as the guest speaker. And on that Friday of the Lawn Care Life Conference, Brandon's going to be doing seminars all day long, teaching us how to know our numbers. And him and Greg Crabtree's firm is very next level stuff. And they do a good job too of making it simple. That was Greg's whole premise of his book: simple numbers,
right?
Big profit, something like that.
Yeah, I got it right here. It's probably my favorite book for the green industry, but this is it right here: Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits by Greg Crabtree. So if you haven't read it, go check it out. It's a great read.
Yeah, and Greg personally won't be there, but he's sending Brandon Gray on behalf of the Greg Crabtree team. And he said that Brandon is actually a better speaker than himself. And Brandon's been really sharp on the calls that I had. And Jason loves Brandon because he's from Alabama. He's a big Alabama Crimson Tide fan. And they're all gushy about that Roll Tide stuff. So
yeah, I know how it goes. I'm from the backwoods of Alabama. You'd never know it because I work in finance, but I grew up on 100 acres in the middle of the woods in Alabama. So basically, when you go to high school in Alabama, the first thing they ask you is if you're for Alabama or Auburn. And if you don't pick one, you're kind of thrown out of the whole herd.
Yeah, well, Jason's definitely chose Alabama. And I'm all excited. I'm like, we got to get Greg Crabtree at the event. And we do. And I think Jason was more excited that they're Alabama fans. He's, these people are going to be great. It's like, yeah, they're great because their book is epic. Jason didn't even read the book. Now, since then, he's got it and read it and is very, very complimentary of the book. But that was what stood out to Jason is those are Alabama fans. Thank you for your time, sir. Stay safe in the hurricane.
It was a pleasure as usual, Paul. I love talking with you.
Cool.